No doubt. Well, I am excited to get into it. Hello, everyone. It is a Monday morning version of Dualistic Unity Raw. So I am going to pass it over to Andrew, who apparently has things to say. I'm very excited to hear what he has to say, and I'm going to do some YouTube stuff while he does it.
All right. Yeah, I have no idea where this is going to go, but I've just been, I need some time to rant because like today, been kind of going through just, it's not like overwhelming feelings. It's just feeling a lot of things sort of. And I can feel myself trying to go through and settle upon something, like settle upon a reason for it, settle upon some certainty essentially. And I feel like I've been through this the last, I don't know, 2 weeks, like in and out, in and out, in and out. And there's been like different, I don't know, like different moments of clarity, but then still in it. And I think there's been an underlying just idea that it shouldn't be happening. I think as much as you can recognize like letting go of that, letting go of the should, letting go of the idea that you should be experiencing something else, that at this point you shouldn't be going through something, we can still or I can still very much get caught in that, thinking like there is still something wrong. And like, I have no fucking idea what it is, like what I'm feeling basically. And so this morning was feeling it again. It's been like every morning, just kind of waking up with just like overwhelming feelings, and it's all surrounding story of Andrew. And there's been moments of clarity where I laugh at like how seriously I take it, because that's where it all comes from, but it's still very much my experience. Like, as much as I can recognize this is having to do with something that I'm not that story, there's still like a very strong pull of it. And so this morning I was like, kind of just, I was doing some work, and then I was just kind of like sitting in it and just like still not feeling, and I was like, fuck it, I'm just going to go on a run. And so I just like got up and ran out the door basically. And as I was going through, was kind of like hitting me how much I still hold on to, like how much, and I will see if it gets emotional, but like how much there is that's still there. Like in moments of clarity, it's like there's almost nothing in the way, or like that feels like a wall. And then, but when you're not in those moments of clarity, like it feels insane. And it's like there's so much there. And it was hitting me like how much as in those moments of clarity, it's like, oh, there isn't anything. All it is a story, because that I've had that feeling like many times over the last 6 months, especially, where it's like it feels like that state of freedom. But then there's points where it's not, like you're very far from that, and you can't even, it's like, what that's like, because I've been through it so many times, and I know that it's right there, but it's like I'm trying to reach into it and I can't, or it's because I'm trying to reach into it, like because I'm trying to cling to like that moment of clarity, like that moment of clarity back there that I experienced, like where's that gone? And I know that it's not that, but then it's what I'm sitting in. And so this morning it was hitting me just like how much there still is that can be of concern. And like when I'm not in that sort of flow state of just not thinking about what's going on, or not caring what it means about me, kind of like how I've felt just talking so far. There hasn't been any thoughts that are coming up, or concerns about any of it. And then it was hitting me like how much, like, can you really just let go? Like, can you really just let go of that concern? Like everything. And I already started crying this morning.
This is the journey. Yeah. This is what it is, right? And I'd like to take a moment to remind you that, see, here's the thing, is that one way or another, this is what growing up is. this feeling of feeling overwhelmed, this feeling of not knowing what to do, this feeling of heaviness. It's come up so many times in our life, but normally what we do is we try to control it away, right? We try and find a way to make ourselves feel like we're in control. It's going to happen a certain way. We tell ourselves a narrative and that makes us feel better. And so we bypass this uncomfortable feeling of feeling overwhelmed for a little while, so long as we can override it with another narrative, right? The alternative is to not do that, which means still feeling these moments, still going through these compression periods, right? But now you're doing so without protecting yourself from it. Now you're doing so without trying to overwhelm it with something else to distract you, right? To take you away from it. So it's the same process, except you're taking a different strategy. Instead of trying to avoid it, instead of trying to paint over it and make it look better or make yourself feel better about it, you're pushing through it and you're recognizing at the other side, like, right, wow, there's a bunch of things that I was thinking about there that caused me to go down that. There's a bunch of stuff that weight is made of. And so you learn from it and you have more of those moments of clarity, which is what you've been doing this whole time. But that all said, you're 28 now, and there's just a shit ton of challenge ahead of you. Like, this is the thing, every time you try something new, something that's challenging, something that's out of your wheelhouse, whether it's starting a business, for example, or being a parent or being in a relationship, these are all things that all of a sudden take away from your ease. They take away from your sense of certainty and they throw you into this shit, right? This is exactly what happens. And all of a sudden you're dealing with all of this weight again and all of this narrative and whatnot. And you have to go through the same process of either trying to cover it up or going through it and seeing where the weight comes from, right? But that's why we encourage people to go and face challenging things. That's why we tell people not to avoid, the discomfort, is because the discomfort is where this urge to dig into that narrative finally pops up. This is why the triggers are so deeply buried, right? And we hide them with comfort. As soon as we're uncomfortable, all of a sudden the narratives pop up. The urge to grip to those narratives pops up. And we have to go through the process of recognizing that habit that we've built. Or we can paint over it, cover it up, and try and continue on with a smile on our face and positivity. But how long does that last? But one way or another, the whole point is going through this, because this is what you learn from. It's very easy to be kind of like a tower philosopher, where you're sitting on top of this tower, kind of looking down at everything, going, yeah, this makes sense, and this makes sense, and this makes sense. Like, does it? Come down from the tower. Apply that shit. Let's see how much it makes sense when people are judging you, when people are telling you, this won't work, or when you're not sure what the fuck is going to happen next, or any of those things. Like, it changes everything. The application is the point. It's not just the philosophy, right?
Yeah. And I think, yeah, it's been some of that for sure. Like the feelings of, like you get, and you can get it, get it and talk about it and say, and it really is, you can say all the right words or whatever, and they can mean nothing. They can mean absolutely nothing. And I had, and this is just kind of like a silly thing, but like friends the other night talking about, and they were like, we were getting a little bit deeper into stuff, and they were like texting about stuff we talk about and just saying it not in a making fun of way, but just like kind of saying it, and it clearly was just taking words that they had heard and just like plugging them into phrases. And it was like, there's no like offense taking it. Like, I laugh at that stuff all the time, but it's like there's just nothing there. And it was so clear to me how much it's like there's something that they could look at and they avoid it by saying it, thinking that they're saying something or doing something. And there's just no willingness to look at what it could possibly be pointing to. And it's just like, I see it as such a, I don't know, I guess you could call it like a subconscious avoidance sort of thing is how it seems, but just like how much there is. And I guess the willingness to go through it and see it, like that's what's hitting me is as much as there have been points where I'm like, oh, I've, worked through a lot, like gotten through a lot, like been through a lot. And like there's still like a lot in there, like in the depths of it. And I'm not afraid of looking at it, is the thing. Like I'm not, and even, like on my run the other day when I took 2 gummies, like I went through some deep, deep, deep shit and was like willing to sit through it, like, and feel it. And I knew it was going to pass. Like there wasn't the concern. I wasn't overwhelmed, but it was hitting me like how much is still there that comes out in certain ways that I don't even like. It's too deep to even see. And like how much is there that those, sorts of tools can bring up. And that's when you work through it. And that's when you like being able to see it is what allows you to work through it. Like until you see it, you can't go your whole life suppressing it. I mean, you can go through your whole life suppressing it and you never work through it. And it's always there. And you're like, what is this? Like, what is this feeling? And you never know because you're not willing to look at it because you just do things. You make more money, you get a bigger house, you do whatever to feel better. You get that person to like you. And it's like all these things that are just feel a little better. Oh, feeling kind of low, feel a little bit better. And we do those things. And like, we don't even realize how much we're just numbing ourselves more and more and not being willing to feel it. But like, hey, feeling it is not an easy thing to like. I get why people go their whole life avoiding that shit that gets built, throughout early parts of our life.
Oh. Yeah. But this is it is see, it's funny because you're 28 and you're dealing with this shit as deeply as you possibly can. And a lot of people go their whole lives and they barely scratch the surface of this stuff, right? They just cover it up. They tune into Fox News, they drink, they join a religion, they do everything they can to put their head in the proverbial sand. And they don't look around because they would have to deal with this. I've been dealing with this for a very long time, and it gets deeper. There's more and more and more. And it's not just Andrew's stuff. That's the thing. You're not just looking at all of the stuff that's within Andrew's story. You're looking at all of the stuff that's within awareness. And it goes deep on both sides. I was telling you about this early in season 1 that, as your awareness expands, you get a real feel for how wide that context is. Not just the moments of clarity, but the moments of confusion. And because your sensitivity is raising, you really feel those moments, right? And you're aware of them even more as you're going through them. And because you're not running from them, you get them right in the face. But that's how you learn sensitivity for how much you are. This is one of the reasons that I can empathize with people to some degree, the way I can, because that feeling, I've explored that feeling many, 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 many times, voluntarily and involuntarily, right? And it's just about becoming familiar with it, recognizing that it's a part of what we are. It's a part of what we are. There's nothing wrong with it. It's not like you're trying to get out of it. You're not trying to solve all of this stuff. You're learning to ride the process of it unraveling. That's all you're doing, right? Like, you could take it seriously. You could think to yourself, oh my God, there's so much to do. There's so much I still have to. That's what your life is. That's what you are. You, Andrew, the character, are a small thread of that process working itself out. Right. So it's important to recognize that. But as such, it's also important to recognize that you are indicative of a shift in our mentality, whereas the majority are indicative of an old mentality. Right. What you're seeing in your friends or in the people that you talk to, or even a lot of the people that we've met online, is a lack of seriousness in regards to this conversation. It's just kind of fun, like, oh, got to be in the present. don't think about the past, that kind of thing. And that's often, I always find it funny how often something like that is used by egotistical people. It's like, they'll do something and they'll be a certain way towards you. And then when you bring it up, they're like, oh, what happened to not living in the past? It's like, this is not an escape. This is not something that you just use as an exit strategy, that kind of thing. But it is important to recognize that you're going to feel isolated to some degree because you're dealing with things in a serious manner, because you're looking at them in a way that other people are not. It's kind of like, I don't expect my daughter to take my job as seriously as I do. I don't expect my daughter to take rent as seriously as I do, right? To me, it's a serious thing. I got to pay rent. To her, it's just something that gets done, right? Until she's older and the responsibility's on her. But that's the point, is the people you're talking to who aren't taking this very seriously, when they have the moment that you're having, then all of a sudden that stuff becomes important. All of those things that they were mocking at one point could actually be useful to them if they stopped running, which is why it's often interesting 5-10 years down the road when friends that once kind of made fun of me talking about this stuff started at like, again, oh yeah, we're all one, Ray. Oh yeah, I'm not what I think. Oh, I'm just limiting myself, right, Ray? That kind of thing. And it's always kind of tongue in cheek, and it's meant in fun. They're not trying to, mock me or anything. They are to some degree because it's self-validating. But I always find it funny that 5-10 years down the road, I hear from those fuckers, and they're like, I was thinking about some stuff you said a while back. It's like, where are you? And the only thing that's changed is the fact that all of a sudden that seriousness is coming around. All of a sudden they can't run from that onslaught that they've been putting off, or at least it's starting to creep in to other parts of their life. And that's the beautiful part about what you're doing, Andrew, is that you're allowing this stuff to surface so you can deal with it before it piles up behind you and overwhelms you, right? Because that's what leads to alcoholism and addiction. That's what leads to, constant levels of anxiety underlying everything, is the fact that it just keeps piling up, man. And we don't deal with it because we don't want to feel like you just felt going through that, right? That's all it is. We just don't want to feel it. Whereas like, this sucks. I want to find something on TV. There's got to be a movie on. Maybe I can download an app, and instead you can just sit through it, feel it, recognize that it's totally justified. Life is fucking hard. Like, that's the thing. Life is hard. And every time you try and face life, you look at it and your brain's like, well, shit, this is what it is. And it's not. But that's the best that's going to happen. Your brain's always going to do that. It's never, ever going to stop doing that. And you're always going to have to deal with the depths of everything that you are on both sides of the scale. It's just learning to keep it light, right? That's all it is. Because again, one way or another, and I want to go back to what I was saying originally, you can either be egotistical and distract yourself from this shit or not. Regardless, you're going to experience it. So it really just comes down to what you want to do with it.
Yeah. And yeah, it is the inevitability, whether you suppress it or not. And like, yeah, I guess that's like the difference, is I'm not distracting myself from it. I'm just like curious about it. But there's also been like subtle desires to want to find out, like to figure it out, like let's work through this. And sometimes working through it is just letting go of your desire to work through it and just sitting in it. And you can have the spots where you're like, this is silly. What are we like still doing? Caught up on this.
It's going to happen. It's going to keep happening, man. That's the whole point. And there's nothing silly about it. We have all the reasons in the world to get caught up in stuff. Like, everything that we perceive is something that we perceive as real if we believe it, right? And there's always going to be that feeling of being overwhelmed. This is one of the reasons I've said before that if you perceive that you can be, you more than likely will feel like you are, right? The only thing that's changed in my life is I just don't take this as seriously. Like, what I mean is that I'm not afraid of being where you are right now emotionally. I've been there. I've spent so much time there. Like, I could sit here right now and have a good cry about a great many things. And it's all in there all the time. Like, I never hide it. This is why I was saying to you before, like, I'm actually a rather emotional motherfucker. You might not see it because I'm usually smiling and I'm usually doing this thing that I do, but I do that because I'm dancing on top of all of them, right? They're all back there. It's just recognizing it's always like that. It gets intense being aware. It really does. But it's the reason that you become such a natural chameleon, right? The more emotions you explore, the more emotions you can resonate with, right? The more honest you are with yourself about what emotions are in there, the more honest you can be when people are displaying them to you, right? You don't have to hide from them. You don't have to run from them. You don't have to be like, oh, it's okay. Let's just be positive. You can sit there in them with them. And that's important. Most of us don't recognize that we can do that with one another and how important it is to do so. Right. But there's no way to build that tool set. There's no way to acquire that sensitivity, that adaptability without going through the shit. Like there just isn't, which is why people are so fucking tone deaf. Unfortunately, is because of the fact that they never actually settle into their emotions. So they can't listen to anyone else's with any sensitivity. They're too busy trying to avoid it. Right? Isn't that interesting? How many people have you met where it's just like, well, let's try and keep this positive if we can. Like, why? It's because, well, I don't like being negative. Well, why is it negative? Like, why is it negative to go through an emotion that isn't necessarily pleasant?
Yeah, I think that's a and we've talked about this before, how you got to go through things in order to know what the fuck they're like, and I think that was part of it. It's like, fuck. And now it's like, I just want to stop crying, but there's, I don't know, there might still be some, but
Oh,
it's
endless
like,
supplies, buddy. Endless supplies.
I know. It's like fucking looking through, it's like being on the other side of a window or a wall, and like looking at something, knowing that you're still holding on to shit that isn't there. Like, and you can see, because you have felt when it's doesn't feel like it's so much there, but it was still there. And then there's like, you're still like, I don't want to be feeling whatever you're feeling. And there's still some of that. And because what that feeling of just like sort of being free and weightless is. And it's like, that's not what we're going through right now. Like, that's not the experience we're having right now. And it's like, this is me recognizing, like, yeah, sure, that's great when you're feeling all great and free, but like, that's not what the fuck we're doing right now. Like, that's just isn't what's happening here and now. And your desire for it to be so is adding to hindering your ability to work through this spot. It's like, fucker, we're going through this shit. I get that you've felt free and light before. That's not what this is. This is going through, getting dragged fucking through some mud, and you're gonna go through it because there is things to be learned. Like, there's more fucking shit to learn. You can't learn things from that state of freedom and peace and joy all the time. Like, as much as there is, like, a few years ago, I felt like I was experienced less of this type of stuff, but it was always because there was just something. Oh, just accept it, just be grateful for something, just something. And I was able to sort of maintain a spot. And it's like the conceptual idea of feeling spirit, fucking spiritual and all that bullshit. But now there isn't oh, I'm feeling this, I got to do this. It's like, I'm just feeling this, and there's nothing I'm grabbing onto. It's just like, and there's not even anything to explain it, really. It's just like, I got sent into a fucking pit to see some shit. It's like, all right, saw some shit. It's like, we're not done yet. And like, but it could be cool if we were done soon. It's like, we're not, though. You're not. And if there's any way for you to empathize as deeply with the rest of yourself, it's like you got to go through things like this. Like there isn't a way to do, and even that, like, yeah, it's my focus is on Andrew, but that's just from my perception. Like it doesn't mean that there isn't so much more happening. Like everything is happening. Everything's happening. And I'm, focused on these things and what they mean, and like trying to get through it, but there's not even a through it. It's just like you're in it, and it's like keep paying attention, like keep paying attention to what you're going through. Like it's and there's even the phrase like this too shall pass, like that is, I'm even hesitant to cling on to that, like that, like, oh, it's gonna, you'll get through it, it's gonna end, it's not gonna last forever. And it's like, it's not even that. I don't even want to hold on to that. It's like, this is where I'm at. This is the wholeness of my experience. Why do I think that this is less desirable, like should be happening less than anything else? Like there's nothing to pass through. It's just what I am, and I'm experiencing more of what I am. So it's not even the perspective of wanting it to end. Like there's a part of me that isn't like there. And that's like the weird part too, is there is a pull that wants it to end, but then there's also a pull that's like, we're finding out some shit. Like we're going through some shit. So it's not even that. Like, and that's the thing. It's like, I don't even fucking know. It's just a lot of different things. And it's like, oh God.
It's a lot. It's a lot. Now, the fun part is, of course, that your state of confusion and your state of clarity both exist now, right? So they're always going to be there. It really comes down to where you gravitate towards and what you're, focusing on and resonating around. But immediately when we're in discomfort or when we're going through emotions like this, and what do? We look for a reason, we look for a narrative, we start beating ourselves up, or we start judging ourselves. And so that's the lesson that we're doing. Don't do that, right? When the emotions are high, just don't do that, right? Just let the emotions be what they are and stop assigning them a narrative that doesn't exist, and it'll pass and you'll learn from it. And that's pretty much it. But I wanted to mention quickly because see, this is the stuff that's always in there for everyone, right? Like there's a lot. This is why when babies cry and are upset, they really cry. It's not like they're just going like, meh. No, it's a full bodied like, ah! And it's everything. Like there's so much in there, and it's always in there. It's always been in there. It will always be in there. It will always be in there. But you're willing to face it. So we have conversations frequently, 5 days a week. And in those conversations, normally, it's fairly light. We deal with this stuff, we're talking about it, but you're still doing the work. You see, you're still doing the work every time you come onto the podcast and you're like, shit, I don't know what to say. Okay, I'm just going to say something. Right. And you go through it. Well, that's a layer that gets peeled back. That's a habit that you've undermined. All of those little habits that you're undermining when things feel great, it's all undermining the substrate, which means eventually it all just kind of collapses underneath you. Then you get to deal with all the stuff that was underneath that layer or those layers. And this is what I'm saying all the time. Like we're always process. We're always process. Now you can be the process of adding more layers, which doesn't mean that you get away from all the shit underneath. It just means that you can't feel it as much. This is why you're distracted, or you're numb, or you're medicated, or you're addicted, or any of those things. Or you can be the process of working away the layers, in which case you're getting deeper and deeper and deeper down to ultimately the root that is causing so much pain, right? And that's it. You're just getting closer to the root. And that ultimately is just the understanding that the pain is exacerbated by the illusion. It's the narrative, right? The pain is always there, right? The emotion of sorrow and frustration and loneliness and being overwhelmed and all that fun stuff, that emotion that we're also very familiar with, sometimes feels like the end of the world. It's always there. it always has that gravity, as does the other perspective or the other side of the coin, which is just surrender, right? Which is the lightness. But that's the duality of our emotional experience. And it's a very wide spectrum, but it all exists now. All exists now. Like even in those moments of clarity, Andrew, you could just switch gears and you'd be right back here. It's just how familiar you are with the terrain and how willing you are to be able to switch gears and know that you're not going to get caught. That's the problem with where you are right now. It feels like it lasts forever.
Oh, fucking A, it does. Like it does. And it's been like in and out of it, but it's been like, yeah, like the last couple of weeks. And I've expressed it a few times, just like feeling like, I don't know. And I'm not settling upon something. And there has been moments of clarity within it, times of, where it's not this overwhelmed, but it's been like an underlying thing that I think is just kind of like fucking, I don't even know, sprouting, I guess. But yeah, like most of the time people start feeling a certain way and they avoid it. Like just with the example of weed, like a lot of people are like, oh, I don't smoke weed. Weed makes me paranoid. Weed makes me anxious. That was my thing for a while. Like I didn't. And now like it still does, especially when I take, 2 gummies, which is like, I used to taking a gummy was like my biggest fear for a while. Like it kind of blows my mind that I can do it the way that I do it now, honestly, because I had some brutal, like I know I've expressed it before, but like I had some brutal experiences on edibles in college. Like I resisted about as hard as you can to the point that I got sick, I threw up, and it's like that was because there was a lot in that, like the shit I say it's so funny because I say it as if it's like, oh, it's one time I took edibles and it was just so much. It's like that shit was always there throughout my life. That was building throughout my life. And I'm at a point now where like, people stay away from those things because they're afraid of feeling paranoid or anxious. Like I'm just not afraid of feeling paranoid or anxious anymore. Like there isn't that fear. Like I'll take a gummy and like smoke some more weed, knowing full well like I may feel loads of anxiety and paranoia right now, which I did the other day, like on those 2 gummies. Like I was holy fuck, like I was feeling people, like I was looking over my shoulder, like I was paranoid as shit for like a couple hours straight and going through. And this was, I think, one of the times where I went deep into, and it was just like whoom, 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 whoom. Oh, you thought you were out of that, whatever. Like here's just loads and loads and loads. And it felt like I was feeling all of it so intensely. And the whole time though, like there wasn't this desire for it to end necessarily. Like there wasn't this pull, like, I need this to stop. There were twangs of like, do I still get paranoid on this? And it's like, shut the fuck up. I don't have to like worry about that. It's just, this is what it is. And I'm going through it and it's continuing on. And like, I know it's not going to last forever, but that's like I was saying, that whole, like, this isn't going to last forever. This too shall pass. Like, that's not the driving thing getting me through it. It's just, there's nowhere else. There's nothing else. It is what it is. And like my desire for it to end will hinder me from being able to pay attention to it. Even that, like, oh, I'm going to get through it. Like it'll pass. Like that is like you're not paying attention to it. You want it to end. And so without that, it's been interesting, but there isn't the fear of going through it, but it's still that feeling of like, we're going through it. We're going through it. And because like you have to go through certain shit to learn certain things. Like you can't learn as much from that spot of clarity. Like you got to get pulled in, which is like, I don't know. And that's why it felt like I was saying before, it feels like being on the other side of like a glass wall, but like the glass wall that you have in, I don't know, like a locker room where it's fuzzy a little bit. And like, what's right there. And it's like, yeah, you're not going over there, right? You're staying right here in this sort of feeling of, and you're going to keep feeling this and just, I don't know, like fucking go through it. It's not even because you're going to learn all this stuff. And it's like, no, this is just an experience you're going to have and you are having. And even like labeling it as an experience is silly to me now because it's not like a separate experience. Like I'm being fucking life. I'm being reality right now, going through something. And yeah, I'm just here, like just here. And it's been all of these ideas of where I should be. Like, this is the quote unquote test of like, let go of that idea that you should be anywhere else. Let go of that idea that this shouldn't be happening. Let go of the idea that of like what you want. Like, who wants that? Who's not willing to experience this? Who's not willing to, like, to not go through this? Like, it's not always like your opinion's fucking irrelevant.
You're never ever going to get to a point where you're not dealing with this. Like, I just need you to recognize that. Like, it's not about not having this stuff to deal with. It's about knowing you have this stuff to deal with. That's really it. Like, it right now, if if a fucking SWAT team were like to bust through my windows and shit, and a bunch of cops like down, 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 you don't think I'd have the temptation to feel anxious, afraid, and overwhelmed? Right? Does that mean, oh, I thought I was over this shit? Does that mean I got to stop and like assess my progress on this quote unquote spiritual path? No, of course not. I'm dealing with the relationship I have with the moment as it's happening, which is all we're ever learning. That's the big misunderstanding about all of this shit. It's like, oh, I'm going to get to a point where I no longer feel fear and doubt, and I'm no longer worried about paranoia, and I'm no longer thinking. It's always in there. It's always in there. It's just a matter of how you perceive yourself that reveals it. That's all it is. As the shades of self-perception change, different levels of self-thought emerge. Right? So in that instance where all of a sudden all hell went loose around me, if I were immediately to think, oh my God, I'm not in control. Oh my God, I don't know what's happening. Oh my God. And all of these things, like they're problems, there's your fear. There's your feeling overwhelmed. There's your anxiety. There's all of that stuff, right? Whereas in that moment, if I'm just like, okay, this is just happening, calm down, align, listen, figure out what you can do moment to moment, totally different reaction, right? I'm not creating a narrative, right? I'm learning to just be in the moment I'm in, not have a preference about it, but to be in it so I can align with it and work my way through it. It has nothing to do with me as a person, nothing to do with my narrative, what I've learned up until now, none of that. Because you could learn none of this shit and all of a sudden in one moment go, fuck, I'm not paying attention. And there's your lesson. And that's all it is. But this stuff's always there. It will always be there. This and more. Right? It's just a matter of recognizing and knowing it. Knowing. And this is what we're talking about knowing how much you are. You know, we talk about it week to week, like watching yourself unfold. This is a part of that. It really is, you know, but there's a lot in there. There's a lot to being the awareness of everything. There's a lot to being infinite. There's a lot to being eternal. There's a lot to the existence that you are. You know, it's just that, again, we spend so much of our life being superficial. But this is the insight. You know, it's funny. It's a feeling. Like I was trying to communicate the other week, could be, I know, last week, about like perceiving a timeline and then all of a sudden that thing kind of compressing, and that being an actual feeling of just becoming more sober, more grounded in reality, more present at the end of the day. You can say the insight was cool and all that, but it was the feeling that went with it. And that feeling, for lack of a better term, is maturity. And you can feel it that way. It's kind of like when you're a kid and, you know, growing up, just shitting on the party.
Yeah, definitely. And it's interesting, like even like that insight of the timeline. compressing. Like we talked about that the other day. And it's funny because like we're always talking, like we're always live streaming, chatting, episodes, all that shit. And like it is always fresh. Like we're always going through shit. We're going through, talking through shit. We're talking through. And I think even just as you were saying that, like it hit me like I don't keep insights in mind anymore. It's like it just comes out. And in the moment, it's like, holy shit. But then it's not like, unless I'm still working through it, I don't look back and I'm like, what was that thing that I said? Like, which one is that? How does that? It's more like a expression as opposed to something I'm holding on to. So I don't even like, I don't think about this as much. Like it comes back to being what is, and like it just comes back to that. Like, and it's not even like, you know, you're not your story, you're not the past. But there's still certain things that'll come up, like deeper things that'll come up. That's like still a part of the fucking narrative, still a part of the fucking story. And in moments of clarity, you know, that's not the case, but it's still like you can have a moment of clarity with a lot of shit underneath it still. And I think that, as you were pointing to, like you work through stuff, you have insights, you share things, you talk through it, like, oh wow, just seeing things like this. It is like chipping away at a certain layer as you go, and you're in spots where it doesn't feel as intense. You know, it's more, they're still down there. And so you're chipping, and then it's like a crack, and then it's like a whoom, and then it's like, oh, and that's when it's not like, oh, like this super high feel. It's like you're just fucking dropping into, it's like, oh yeah, this. It's like falling into yourself, just going through like story after story after fear after fear after fear after insecurity after insecurity. And it's like, yeah, those are all under that. And they're still there. Like they're still like impacting your experience. And you can't even tell because it's not like hindering your experience anymore, because you're still willing to step into things. And that's been a big shift for me, is just like being willing to be like, yeah, fuck it, I'll step into this. Like, yeah, I'll probably be super anxious or nervous or whatever, but it's not going to stop me anymore. But that doesn't mean that there isn't still a lot there, like still a lot of fucking layers to every experience that you have, despite being willing to work through. But like your willingness to go through it allows for you to work through those things as you go. And like, you can't until you feel it. You can't until you're in it. You can't until that layer gets ripped off. And it's like, there's a lot under here. And then below that, you know, there's another layer that like you chip away at, and all of that. And it's not like, the more you recognize that you're not what you think, the more those layers become fucking realities layers, like chipping as at the collective mentality. And like, and that gets pulled. And so you can be feeling things that aren't even necessarily yours. They're yours, but not yours, you know. That don't make sense to anyone who's listened, but man.
Yeah, we all have access to the same depth of emotion. It's just that we give it different cognitive reasons. I find that always really interesting, that everybody can feel the same depth of pain, but everybody's going to give it a different reason based on their story and their narrative. But the depth is universal. That's what we feel. And the nice thing about that that process that happens, where you're chipping away at things, kind of like, yeah, I'm doing the work. I'm chipping away at that. I saw that insecurity. I'm gonna let that go. And and it's all very comfortable because you're doing so from a place where you feel fairly confident. And then all of a sudden, all of that just falls, and you're just like, oh my God, I don't feel confident at all. And the nice thing is all that's happened is you become more aware of everything that was there that up until that moment was actually influencing you, whether you recognized it or not. It was actually limiting how free you could actually feel on the other side of the perspective, because there was all that underlying shit that you were avoiding because of this feeling that goes with facing it. And so with every time that you face this feeling, every time you go a bit deeper into this, you're also expanding the level of clarity that you have access to now, because you're not being dragged down by all these tiny influences that you weren't aware of before. Right now, there's more consideration on the other side of the spectrum. This is something that you're going to notice on the polar opposite to this, on the swing back. You're going to be like, oh my God, I was having all these insights. Oh my God, I was seeing this. How many times have you gone through this, Andrew? All of a sudden you have weeks and weeks and weeks of holy shit, I'm just seeing it everywhere. I'm seeing it everywhere. And then the fall. And it's funny because we call it fall, but it's really the result of all the work you're doing. And that's it. It's just like, it sucks. It's like you worked your way to get here. Shut up. We don't necessarily want to look at it that way, but it's true. And it's not a bad thing. It's the process of taking it in, going through it. It's not pleasant. It's not pleasant, but no catharsis is. It's really important to recognize that every emotional moment where you are letting go of something substantial, it's like tearing off a Band-Aid, man. It's always like that for everybody. This is something that anybody going through any kind of crisis in mental health will attest to. It sucks to heal. As great as it is after the fact, the process of healing itself is challenging. It's hard. It touches all your triggers. It makes you really, really want to reach for that narrative, which unfortunately stops the healing. So every time you plunge a little deeper, you get super uncomfortable. What you're really doing is you're recognizing stuff that was pulling your strings without you seeing it before. And now you're seeing it, which means that after you're done going through the discomfort and you find your way back up to that, somewhat level of clarity where you're going to chip away again, you're going to end up chipping away at shit that you just became aware of, that you couldn't chip away at before because you were avoiding it, leaving it in the shadows because it was uncomfortable. You were chipping away at everything in the light. All the stuff in the shadows still waiting. Now all of a sudden the light's expanded. There's still more shadows.
Yeah, that's yeah, and it's always that, because even you work through your own shit, and it's like, I say that just theoretically, work through your own shit, and you're not just you, like you are just you, but so it's like just that continued process, and there doesn't have to be like, we can create this idea like, oh, chipping away is like the good times, and the fall is the tough times, but they're all just, it's part of the ride. It's like a roller coaster. You got to go up in order to have the drop, and the drop is scary but also exciting, and then you get the rest. And it's not just this objective sort of thing where the chipping away is enjoyable and the falls, the overwhelm is bad. It's not like a good or bad thing. And I think that's what this fucking round is showing me. It's like, it isn't bad. It's just a component of it. And like the opinion that it's something that I can handle well or not handle well, it's like letting go of that. Like, how am I doing? Shut the fuck up. How am I handling it? Shut the fuck up. Like, that is what I'm seeing. Cause like my whole fucking life, it's been, how am I doing? Like, and it's a lot of people go through that, but it's yeah, that desire to measure where you're at and have that thing you can hold on to. Like, I at least know this, I'm doing this well. And it was like going through it. I could see it's been hitting me. Like, I can't believe how it never hit me before. Like the investment in the ego from like the quote unquote positive perspective, like having a very positive idea of yourself, and like that being the side of the spectrum that you fall on. Like, I was, up until like a month or two ago, I was coming at this conversation solely from the side of people having a difficult time with their ego, like from the negative perception of yourself. Like I can't believe, like, it's kind of mind blowing how little I saw how powerful the ego can be from the feeling good about yourself, because that's not where I came from. But there were sides, and so it was hitting me, even just like getting fucking whacked with all of these like insecurities and experiences in the past, like how much, if I hadn't gone through those sorts of things, like that's where I could have ended up, like very easily in that side of it, where it was, there was still, because there's always that subdued sort of feelings when you're in comparison, when you're perceiving yourself to be separate from everything. As much as you can think that, you know, feeling really good about yourself, you're existing in comparison, there's still going to be that judgment, fear of judgment, concern, all of that stuff still comes with. It's just, you know, which do you fall on, where it's like most of the time or feels like it's not most of the time. And for me, it was like, I was seeing it like, it was intense, but it was like, it was just enough that I didn't fall on that side of that. And like, as brutal as it is to go through certain types of things, like it was necessary. Like I would not be where I'm at now if I hadn't gone through those things that kind of cut out my legs from under me as I was growing up. And those experiences, like if I hadn't had those, as much as you look back and you're like, oh, I wish, you know, that traumatic experience, that traumatic experience, that traumatic experience, like it was all informative towards you, like maintaining a degree of balance. And I was just, it was weird, like seeing those as, holy fuck, I had to go through that. Like I had to experience that, because if I hadn't, like I wouldn't have questioned myself. I would have fucking loved myself like a bunch if I hadn't gone through those things that caused me to feel insecure and question and, you know, feel anxious and nervous and worried. And like, it's a bitch to like see that, but also be so fucking appreciative of it while also still like reaping the repercussions of like still them still being there, but simultaneously recognizing like basically the necessity, or else I could have easily, and you know, given trajectory, upbringing, and everything, like had on paper everything that causes someone to be that. And it was like just sprinkled in enough shit that it was like I didn't stay there. Like I was in a spot in my mid 20s where there was just enough that I questioned, just enough that I was willing to run with that questioning. And yeah, it's just, it's weird how it hasn't hit me, that side of the ego that's like the positive side, that, so, you know, celebrities, whatever, are all like very invested in an illusion of themselves that caused them to see themselves in a certain way, because I never saw it from that side. And man, fuck, it's so weird. And it's just been like the last month I've even been aware of that.
Yeah. And it's because you've been working really, really, really hard at just insight as a whole. But you know, it's funny. A little while ago, we were having a conversation, I believe this was last week, actually, about how it's always tempting to make really, really deep content in terms of like making a video and going straight into the, like, we're all one, get out of your way, blah, 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 blah. And the problem is those get a little long and it loses some people. And I had mentioned, well, okay, so the challenge now is, given where you found yourself, to build bridges back to where you came from, which kind of didn't help with this process that you're going through, because now you're thinking about all these other things rather than the deep end, which is why it's really important to go back and forth. See, this is why it's really important to understand all the deeper stuff and to be in the present being goofy. right? Because that's where the application is. It's in the being present, being goofy without thinking about it. And you can go, well, I'm being goofy so I can prove that. See, that's not it. Right? Like, even if you're like, this is what goofy is. Goofy doesn't mean anything. It just means being whatever it is the fuck you are, whatever it is you're doing. What is it? That's it. And that's the application to all the deeper end of this stuff. You see, that's the thing, is that you can pick apart all this stuff. You can chip away at all this shit. But what are you doing with it? Right? To me, the point of chipping away at all this shit is not so I can sit on top of some rock and espouse wisdom to the masses, because honestly, you don't fucking need me. The whole reason for me chipping away at my shit is for me. That's it. It's for me. That's why I chip away at my shit. Watch out for the pressure. As much as we are doing this thing with dualistic unity, there is no point to this. We're not trying to get anywhere. And the same is true individually. We're not trying to get to some point where we are not what we've always been. We are just becoming aware of everything we've always been. That's all that's changed. That's all that's changing. We're not getting anywhere. We're realizing where we are. That's it. And so when you have that thought, like, Christ, I'm still dealing with that, watch out for that thought, right? That's a false judgment. It doesn't actually exist. Of course you are. It's always now. What else are you going to deal with other than yourself?
Yeah, and the fact that you said that, it hit me like one of the fucking whirlwinds I was in going through. I was like, am I even applying any of this? There was like a weird thought of like, am I even, like, what am I doing this for? Like, am I learning? Like, what is I don't even know what it was like, what was the point of this anyway? Like, what is the point of working through all of these things? And I think in the moment, like, I couldn't even come up with an answer. Maybe I was just so in the throes of shit that, like,
I've got an easy one for you.
Yeah.
What's the point of looking up when you're walking? To see your environment.
Yeah.
Right? You could look down at your feet the entire time, but you're not going to see where you're going. You're not going to see what you're experiencing. You're going to experience a very limited thing according to your very limited view. There is no purpose to looking up except to widen your perspective. And that's what this is. That's all this is. It's not some purpose like you're going to get somewhere fucking magical. You're recognizing how magical you already are. Right? And that doesn't mean anything like positive. There's very much a duality to what I mean by magical. But that's it. That's all it is. It's just raising awareness of what you are. We're not getting anywhere. And that means that some idea, like you're going to get to it at this point where you're an enlightened master, and all of that idea of like enlightened masters don't deal with anything. They deal with all of it. That's the whole point. Yeah, that's the whole point. They deal with all of it. They feel it all. They're aware it's all in there, and they dance with it, right? Because they haven't been running from it. That's the only thing. It's not like they've achieved some plateau where they're no longer influenced by everything that is in awareness. It's just that they're aware of what they're being influenced by, because they've looked at it. And that's unfortunately what we often don't do. We don't look at all of the things that are pushing us and pulling us. We don't look at that reason that we need to argue our point, right? Continuously over and over and over again, that we need to feel satisfied, that we need to feel valuable. Like, we don't understand where all of those influences come from because we don't look at the pain that we're trying to run from. Right? We don't look at the discomfort. We don't look at the suffering. And that's the point. Looking at it, all of a sudden we're like, oh, I see that now. And then we can let go of our judgment of it. Right? But it's not until we look at it that we can let go of our judgment of it, and therefore of us going through it. Because that's one of the things that goes with that feeling, the automatic urge to judge yourself for being there, right? Which unfortunately just makes it worse. That's actually part of that feeling. That's how it perpetuates itself. It's like, I feel shitty, I should think. And immediately the thought is, you're a piece of shit. Like, I feel shittier, I should think. You're still a piece of shit. I feel shitty, I should think, and it just keeps going like that. Like, and that's what it is, because that's the product of that mentality. You can't rely on thought there. It's not going to pull you out. It just reinforces the perception you're in. That's the bitch about thought. Like, we rely on it like it's going to change our perception, but our perception comes first.
Yeah, that is oh god. That's so funny. I mean, yeah, because it's been fucking plenty of that. It's like as much as I don't want to admit that, and that's even part of it, is like not like it's like, yeah, I've been like, why am I going through this? And it hit me this morning too. Like, oh god, so many just like different fucking things have hit me. And like I caught myself, but I was asking, like, what's the purpose of all of it? And I was like, what the like, and it hit me how much we all ask that question. It's like, we're asking the wrong questions. We're asking the wrong questions. That's not, that question stems from confusion. It stems from assumptions that aren't the truth. Like, that's where that question comes from. Why is this happening? What? Hold on. Happening to who? Who's it happening to? And even that, or like, what's the purpose? Why? And that's not it. Like, those are irrelevant fucking questions. They are straight up irrelevant. It's like, this is what you are. There is no why. There is no purpose. You're not getting anywhere. You're not becoming anything. It's like, this is just it. It's just you. But as soon as the concern, as soon as this versus that, as soon as the comparison of this moment versus another moment comes in, the concern about this moment versus another moment, the concern about you versus another, like, as soon as that comes in, that's the confusion is back. The question of why, what's the purpose, what's the meaning behind all of this? It's like, that is an irrelevant fucking question. It really is. Like, it keep questioning what you're settling upon, I guess. Like, keep going through it and you'll realize how silly of a question that is. It's not about why. It's not about what your purpose is. It's about what you are and being what you are. And there's no rules to that. There's no guidelines to that. There's no directions to that. Like, this you right now it's the forefront of reality, being reality. There's nothing to become. It's just being what you are. And so it's not about why or your purpose. It's like, yeah, it just hit me how ridiculous those questions are. But those are like the big ones. Those are the big ones we think are, got to find that out. Like, you'd be asking different questions if you weren't settling upon those assumptions.
That's why I'm always suspicious of what I'm thinking. This is something I reiterate all the time. Don't necessarily believe your thoughts reflect truth. Right? Your thoughts are always basically perpetuating their origin, whatever keeps you focused on them. Okay, that's the whole thing. So thoughts can be addictive, and I don't rely on them as a measure of truth. I do rely on them as a measure of where the fuck I am in terms of my mentality. Like, if I'm thinking about myself a lot, or I'm thinking about other people a lot, I'm immediately aware that I'm stressed. Right? Like, oh, I'm doing the full body clench. I can feel that, right? Because immediately with the full body clench comes all the clenched thoughts trying to protect you. Right? So it always comes down to my perception or my state of being, which is somewhere in the spectrum of tension or relaxed. Right? So all of a sudden, the spectrum for me isn't necessarily about dealing with the thoughts, rather than dealing with the state that the thoughts are coming from, which is the spectrum of tension or relaxation. So this is why I always say, just relax. Right? And it's like, well, that's not going to help with the thoughts. It's like, it does actually, because it changes the level that you're coming from, which changes the thoughts that you're dealing with. Consider the spectrum of tension to relaxation, kind of like an elevator. Okay. And every level has its own kind of thoughts, like third floor, ladies wear, that kind of thing. Well, this would be like third floor, self-judgment, that kind of thing. So relax. All of a sudden you go up to the next floor. What's here? A little less judgment, maybe a little bit more desire. Oh, maybe a little bit of pride. Oh, and then you go up and you relax a little bit more. All of a sudden there's a little less pride, a little bit more need for courage though, but you're relaxed enough to exercise that courage. And so it's just a spectrum. This is why I say, like, you can think or you can breathe and be where you are. So when I'm feeling anxious, for example, I've got a big thing coming up and I can feel that tension coming up. I do this. And I visualize and I feel just weight coming off my shoulders. I can feel it. Right. And I just let it sink into the ground and disappear. And all of that vibration just stops. All of that anxiety just stops. And why? Because I've stopped committing all that energy to it. I've let it go. Instead of going, oh, I'm anxious, more energy. Oh, I'm anxious, more energy. Oh, I'm anxious. It's like you're tossing it fucking wood pellets and waiting for the fire to go out. Right? You're feeding it. You're feeding it every time you cope with it. You're feeding it every time you run from it. You're feeding it every time you have an opinion about it. You're feeding it each and every fucking time it comes into your attention. Breathe it out.
And even when you're feeling that, people don't even want to look at where it comes from. Like they're not even willing to be like, look beyond just the superficial, like, oh, it's got to be this. It's like, but why is that? And that's the why question, I think, that's more relevant. It's like, why are you so tense? Why aren't you relaxed right now? And being willing to look at that, because it's not just the thing that's happening, and there's something behind that curtain of like why you're concerned about that happening or why you're concerned about that thing. It's like, and eventually it'll come back to you and your value and your perception of your value and the assumption you're going to make of your value based on that. But yeah, like that's the question of like, why am I feeling like this? And being willing to like be honest with yourself about it, but simultaneously like not, it's like a balance between not being so like, I got to figure this out, but also not, I'm not even going to look at it because it's uncomfortable sort of thing. It's like somewhere in between. And the less it means about you, like the less you feel attached to, oh, whatever this is, it's going to mean so much about me. Like, as you're willing to let go of that, you can look at more, you can see more. And that's just it. Like that question before, definitely hit of like, why look up when you're walking? Like, why look around? Just to see more, to experience more. And as that vision widens, like there is more to be experienced, and more is not just, that side of the spectrum that you prefer. More is more is more is more is more. And why? It's not about that. It's why not? Like, what are you afraid of exploring? It's like going into a dark cave, not knowing what's in there, but just kind of being curious, like wanting to find out. And you've explored the other caves. Like, here's a new one. It's like, it could be fucking the scariest shit ever, or it could be amazing. And you don't know. And there's not necessarily a desire for one over the other. It's just the experience itself. It's just going through it and just exploring more of yourself. And yeah, the less judgments you can have about what it means about you. It's like exploring a cave and then something good happens or something scary happens, and you're like, start thinking that it means something about you. And it's like, that's fucking irrelevant. Wait, why are you attaching to that? That's so silly. But that's what we do. And we see something that's a lot or going through, and it's our attachment to thinking that it means something about us that freaks us out.
Other than how much we are. Isn't it interesting? Like, we'd like to make everything about some character rather than to recognize that it's just a reflection of everything we are. We actually look at thoughts as limiting instead of evidence of how limitless we are, which I always find really interesting, right? And it's only because, again, our preferences. because of our fears, because of how we look at the experience of being us and how it feels at the end of the day. And we all have these knee-jerk reactions to how we feel. We really do. Like, Jesus, I'm feeling really uncomfortable. It's got to be because people don't like me. And it's just like, or just wonder why you give a fuck if people like you. Right? Where's that coming from? And then all of a sudden you start to go, okay, maybe it's not that. Maybe that's not where the feeling is coming from. And it changes. Right? But that's the whole thing. We settle. And then what's worse is we hold on to things because they're self-defining. I think about this all the time. This is one of my triggers. It's like, careful, you're defending your suffering. You're attaching to something that you're going to have to keep dealing with until you decide to let it go. And that just means letting go of your attachment to it as something that defines you and gives you that level of certainty. And it's so interesting because that's all that you're really doing, Andrew, is you're just letting go of certainty, false certainty. You're letting go of it and you're becoming aware of exactly how much life is. And it can be overwhelming when you spend your life not necessarily facing that, which is unfortunately what a lot of kids go through. That's the schooling system. That's how our society really raises us, is like keep us comfortable, right? Make sure that we're always protected. We don't have to be responsible. We can nitpick over stupid little things and judge each other over petty little self-definitions. And we don't ever have to get anywhere deep, where unfortunately all of our worst habits are coming from. Right? This is why you can have somebody who goes to work and appears to be, your average day-to-day, person who's living their life, they're voting, they're buying their groceries, they're doing all that. And meanwhile, they're a closet racist. Right? Well, where's that coming from? Fear, judgment, a bunch of shit that they're not looking at. Right? And it's because we're not looking at it. Instead, we're like, shut that person up. Hate speech shouldn't be tolerated whatsoever. It's like, well, how are we supposed to address where it's coming from? Right? And this is our societal problem. This is our individual problem. We run from what we are instead of becoming aware of what we are, which would change what we do with what we are. And that's it. But man, we're coming to the end of this episode. I want to take a minute to say thank you. And I really do mean that. And I know a lot of people who've been listening and watching this episode feel the same way, because this shit's rough. This shit is rough. It's hard to go through. And I know looking at me is a terrible measure of how grueling this path can be, because I've just given up on sanity. And so I prefer laughter even when I'm going through the deeper, darker shit. Right. But it isn't easy to go through. And I know sometimes people watch the show and they get the impression like, fucking Andrew and Ray are just out there making it look easy. They're enlightened masters. They're talking from the perspective of God. It's like, no, man, we're just as much in the shit as you. Just as much, and that's why we relate. And we're so very proud of each and every person who's on this path, because it is not for the faint of heart, which I said very early on.
Yeah, no, I appreciate it. It's it's not it's so funny. Like, you'll have all these ideas of like spirituality, and it's like everyone's just trying to feel better, and they see that as a way to do so. It's like there's so much more to it than just like feeling good, feeling good all the time. It's like, I mean, I guess that's a way you can spend eternity, but come on now, you probably want a little bit more variety in your experience. And it's just funny how like you can't, like, I couldn't learn shit that I'm learning or be able to down the road resonate when someone's like explaining this and they're like, I don't even know how to say it. Like, I don't know how to say it right now. It's like, oh yeah, I've been through that. Like, that's a recognition I've had. Like, that's an insight I've had, is like how often it's like, the will, you perceive it as some will external to you. That's like, you got to go through this, like the universe, like, yeah, obviously fuck all that. But it is the reality of you using, quote unquote, using the character as a tool to like, it's like, we're going through this. It's not that you have to have the experience, but it is an experience to be had that can learn from. And it's just a product of the willingness to chip away too, that eventually, you chip long enough and that shit cracks and that shit crumbles. And that's a component. And that's the the process, the swinging, the pendulum swinging back and forth.
Yeah, absolutely. Which is why sometimes, especially when we're getting to the deeper end of this conversation, you will notice on my face that I get almost not sorrowful, but there's definitely a tone on my face. Like there is some deep, dark pain underneath that conversation. It's because at the deepest level of it, you're dealing with the spectrum of duality that is being universal awareness. This is why I was saying early on, I really felt for God. I really, really empathized with what it is to be eternal forever and to have no creator to meet. That's a hell of an emotional spectrum. So that all said, we are going to end this here because we could keep going, but we're going to continue on Patreon in 15 minutes. Patreon.com/dualistic unity. You can join us for only $5 a month. It's a tier 1 call. So if you haven't joined us yet, definitely do consider doing so today. Andrew, man, as always, thank you. I will chat with you shortly.